So, hello and welcome to the Live Better Connected podcast. For those unfamiliar, this podcast aims to showcase the benefits of mobile connectivity and to bring to the fore what can be done with technologies such as 5G. Today, I am really happy to welcome Steve Wind-Mozley, Chief Marketing Officer for LiveU, a company that is very much at the vanguard of what can be done with mobile technologies. So, welcome, Steve.
Great. Thanks for having me, Gareth. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, first thing I think is LiveU. It's a fairly interesting company. You do some really amazing stuff, but to most people, it's a company that's not as well. It's not a sort of household name. Could you explain a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So we play in predominantly the broadcast space, but I guess who we are is we're a technology company and we're on a really simple mission. Now, we believe that video is probably the most powerful form of communication available on the planet. And we believe that the ability to share live video, live visual stories, if you will, from anywhere, we think that power should be accessible to as many people as possible because it's a great way to inform, educate, and entertain. And if we can get more people sharing their stories in real time, we think maybe the world will just be a slightly better place.
Excellent. And so, what exactly is the technology? I've heard terms such as bonded cellular technology, which is behind what LiveU does, and particularly it uses the mobile signal to do that. What is that?
Well, let me take you back to where it all started. 16 years ago, our co-founder, massive football fan, was walking to the game with his son, and his son said, all these trucks, they've got big dishes on the top, there's loads of people running around. What are they here for? And when you think about it, those trucks, those satellite trucks, or OB vans, as we used to call them, were there to bring the action, the football story, to people who couldn't be at the match. And our co-founder thought, well, hang on, in my pocket, I've got this device that has, back in the day, still had more computing power than we used to put people on the moon. Surely everything's connected right now. Why do we need so much expense, effort, and energy just to connect a sporting match to a disparate audience? How can we bring people inside? So he went away and he thought about, can I use mobile phones to transport a video signal, an IP video signal, from source to a production center? And it turned out that, of course, sending video over a wireless connection was fiendishly difficult. And so he had to invent with a number of his colleagues a set of technologies, one of which is called LRT, LiveU Reliable Transport. But it's just a clever way of taking a video feed, so a camera, slicing it up and sharing that feed over multiple connections, and then reassembling them on the other side, doing some clever error correction and some compression, so that you have a reliable, high-quality, usable stream. And effectively, you can get rid of the satellite trucks, get rid of the cable runs and the lots of time and expense setting things up, and be able to go to where the story is, but using the freedom that we all take for granted with our mobile communication devices.
It's funny as you say that. I sort of it reminds me of the sort of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where they moved the chocolate across through the TV screen. But I think it's a lot more technology that goes into it. So, just trying to bring that to life. I think the biggest event that we've had recently was the royal coronation, which I understand again your technology was behind providing the first 5G broadcast of a royal coronation. And just to put that into context, if we went back 50 years in 1953. The broadcast, it was watched by people in other people's houses, or they had to go to a TV or a pub or a cinema. There was huge trucks, as you said, thousands of people. But here you were, actually broadcasting via a mobile signal, the royal coronation. Tell us about that.
So that was a super interesting approach. So one of the things that we've all experienced, right? If you go to somewhere where there are a lot of other people, there are always going to be a lot of other mobile phones. And so you end up with this thing called congestion. You have lots and lots of people trying to access a network, which if you're trying to push a high quality video signal, having lots of other people trying to use the same bandwidth can be problematic. So We worked with a couple of providers, so the BBC and one of our partners, Mutual Wireless. We worked with those guys to produce basically a private 5G network that we shared with the world's broadcasters to be able to basically avoid the congestion that was on the public network. So working with Ofcom, we were able to procure some spectrum, and we effectively had our own private 5G network that we then connected our field units, our video encoders to, and used that to be able to transport video streams directly to control centres, bypassing the public network. But we also did another thing with ITN and our friends over at Vodafone Business, where we used a slice of a publicly available network to pull back a very robust stream of the new king, as he was, and his family on the balcony. And we used, that's a 5G slice. The interesting thing about that was in the production schedule, ITN thought that they would use the footage for maybe 20 seconds. It ended up being live for 40 minutes and viewed by hundreds of millions of people. And that was them seeking a solution with our help to avoid having to run cables and doing possible things across the mall and up the side of the building. That just wasn't going to happen. So the only way they could access and control the capture of that particular element was to think outside the box, and things like 5G and network slicing really enabled them to deliver different creative solutions that avoided the complexity and the cost and the time and the effort that it normally takes of having RF line of sight challenges, cable runs, people tripping over cables, and huge amounts of power that involves. So it was a very neat solution, all built
And
around the fact that mobile signals work.
And you mentioned 5G private networks and 5G slicing. I mean, this is technology that these new generations of mobile networks enable, and that haven't been possible up to this point. And equally, just to give for our listeners here, these 5G networks are being rolled out at the very moment. The UK is being covered, and we have a government commitment now that the mobile operators provide 5G standalone to the majority of the populators by 2030. So, I mean, the question is, is it's only going to get better?
Absolutely, and I think that's a great thing. So, we talk about our mission as being, how can we make this technology, the ability to share live video from anywhere, accessible to as many people? And when you think about the problems that stop most people doing that, it's around cost. It's around complexity. So we will say, how can we shorten the workflow? How can we simplify the process? So what can we take out to make it more accessible? I think is part one. But then we have to look at cost. And as we see things like 6G coming down the pipe, hopefully fairly soon, then that's a great opportunity for us to be able to share the efficiency savings that will deliver. So if we can reduce the cost per hour to produce a piece of live content, then the benefits of that flood through the entire content ecosystem all the way to the audience. So that has to be better. And driving ubiquity of stories, driving ubiquity of sharing information is something that really we think is very powerful for the world.
Excellent. And I assume you weren't faced with the issue that happened on a BBC broadcast where they were using 5G and they ran out of data.
We always make sure that we have multiple redundancies in terms of data provisioning. So that didn't happen to us. There was in testing, I'm sure they don't mind me sharing this. Obviously, there are a lot of dignitaries, and the US dignitaries, obviously, when they roll their presidential limo, the Beast, it does all sorts of wonderful things. It sends out lots of RF signals. So during testing, it did cause one or two little hiccups and black spots, which had to be compensated for. But it wasn't of the fact that anybody ran out of data. It was just some very unusual RF activity.
So that is fascinating. And the technology that you're using, again, to emphasize this is through the mobile signals, but it's not just obviously news broadcasting, it's any type of broadcasting. And again, to familiarize our fans here, I'm a Formula One fan, and some of the things that have changed over the years, and what you can do now with the apps that you utilize and how you view it is it's not just one single linear channel now. You can now view streams from each of the drivers or at different parts. Some might say if you're watching Verstappen, there's not much happening in front of him now, so you might want to watch it a bit further back with the race, but it's on demand. I can choose where I want to watch that race at any point, even if I want to just go to the pit stops. And again, your technology enables this, and I'd just be interested, tell us more about from a sports broadcasting perspective.
Absolutely. So I think sports broadcasters have long been at the vanguard of trying to work out how to make things more immersive. So when we talk about sports, we immediately start thinking about passion. We call the people who watch sports fans. They're fanatical. But here's the thing, they're fanatical about different elements of the sport. They might particularly follow Hamilton because he's a far better driver than that other Dutch guy. Apparently, I'm told. I don't know. But everyone has their own view. So typically, you would have camera one, camera two, camera three, and they would be the views you would chop through. But by freeing the directors, the visual storytellers, the sports storytellers to deploy more cameras around the arena of sport, and then using digital technology to enable the end user to select their view, all of a sudden a new level of immersion opened up. Which has really changed the way that we tell stories about sport and make sport far more accessible to far more people. And before we get on to talk about this, but is that accessibility, taking sport and taking cost out of sports storytelling is hugely important, because then you can take it from, yes, you can serve a tier one sport, as you mentioned, so football or whatever else it might be, but you can then go down the tiers. And I think women's football has been a great example of that, where the accessibility, the fact that you can stream a match where previously it wouldn't have been economically viable to do so at all. Now you can share those stories with people who are passionate about it and start to build a real momentum behind some of these secondary or tertiary sporting tiers.
Well, we can't mention women's football with obviously not mentioning England's Lionesses, who will be taking on Australia in the World Cup semi-final. So we wish them all the best and hopefully all the way. But you mentioned, women's football as a sort of a smaller sport, and as you say, not sort of tier one sports, and how this technology really can bring it from sort of that minority status really into the fore. Some of the figures we hear now of stadiums for women's football packing out, especially at Wembley and others. But again, it's bringing along the masses is through broadcasting. And I would imagine, I'd be keen to how has that enabled that? How has that empowered these smaller sports, and also the multiple channels we can now watch them through? It isn't just your single one or five channels. We've got many options now. So again, what other sports as well can have been helped recently? What other examples do you have?
So many. I mean, it's interesting as you were saying that. I was just sort of thinking back. So in the 50s in America, a hit TV show would generally reach around about 40% of the available viewing population. Now, a hit TV show generally hits around about 11 to 12%. So what you've got is many more people viewing, but they've got many, many more options. So when you then say, well, actually, I want to share, I don't know, ping pong or cliff diving or whatever your sport may be, you're not just competing against the tier one sports, so Saturday night football, but you're also competing against everybody else with a good story to tell, because the cost to serve has been reduced so drastically, and you can stream to whatever destination you want. So you're not limited by this distribution cabal, which was broadcast. You can now create a streaming point of view anywhere. So what that's led to is lots of people finding audiences, because the setup, the on cost and the production costs have made it so accessible for people to tell their stories. And we as an industry have had to respond by increasing the quality of the storytelling tools they have. So what do I mean by that? Well, 4K. We've all got big screens somewhere in our home right now, and if you watch sport, you want to see the ball move smoothly through the air. And when you think about doing that over a mobile signal, it can get quite complex. And everyone goes, oh, but 5G, this is a really fast service. Yes, it's really fast for download. But of course, if you're filming something, what you're doing is you're going against the stream, you're pushing an upload, which is why you want to bond as many different connections together as possible. So, for instance, one of our units, an LU800, has 8 dual modem SIM slots in it. Plus, it's got 2 Wi-Fi's plus some Ethernet. So, in total, it's got 14 points of connectivity that you can use concurrently. And we need that because we're trying to provide a stable 4K signal so that anyone anywhere can then tell a story in startling quality. Or they may decide that actually they want to emulate that big match special where you have the camera one is pointing at the pitch, but you've got a camera behind the goal, another camera on the other side, and then you've got a tracking camera so you can follow the speed. You've got 4 cameras. That's quite complex. But technology now enables us to feed those 4 cameras into one unit, synchronize the streams, and then send them straight to one receiver, so that all of a sudden, multi-camera production in a mobile sense, not limited by having a studio or whatever, is accessible to anybody who wants it. And that quality of storytelling really then opens up the opportunities to monetize sports, which just simply couldn't have played in that field.
And what's the kind of data you must be using? Because we talk about a number of devices is nearly around 15 billion across the world. That's not mobile phones. That's machine to machine. We talk about the data on the mobile networks increasing in the UK by 40% year on year. It's not megabytes, gigabytes. It's terabytes and petabytes, and even higher. I mean, if you're doing this with multiple streams and multiple SIMs, I mean, what's the kind of data throughput that you're using?
So we tend not to disclose all of that, but yes, we're definitely in the terabit scenario. And really, for just when you think back to a unit, so this unit here is a backpack, so you would see this being connected to a camera on the side of a sports field or whatever. Typically, it's got a stable 70 megabits per second connection happening in both ways. So it's doable. And so, modern codecs are really the boon here. So that the intelligently compressing and then reassembling the streams is really the secret sauce behind all of this.
And we keep talking about streams and feeds. And am I correct in thinking you have the Guinness World Record for the number of live streams?
Yes, well, we supported it. It was actually Sky during the 2015 UK election. They own and still have the Guinness World Record for the most concurrent live streams used for a production broadcast at any one time. And they were all LiveU streams because obviously they didn't want to go dark. So reliability was really key.
Wow. So, I mean, it just shows you how far it's come. And you keep mentioning the opportunity and the cost reduction, that no longer you need, again, going back to that sort of coronation in 1953, multiple trucks and satellite links and everything. I just, again, the real importance here is that it is mobile and you can go anywhere, and you've reduced it down to backpacks. What's one of the most strangest places where you've used your technology and you've broadcast either a sports or a news or?
Strangest. Well, in 2013, my VP of marketing, Ronan, was the first person to stream live from the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. But I don't know whether that was strange. I think one of we've had customers who have won Emmys from the places they stream from. So whether that's from the inside of a crater of an active volcano, I know Etna has just erupted, but that's one of them. We stream from planes, trains, automobiles, you name it. If you can access it and it's on the planet and you can see the sky, you can stream from it.
So anywhere is really open nowadays with these technologies. And what about sort of we talk about the quality of the signal and you think of football, that's in a very static place. Again, what about sort of it extreme sports and things. Can you get streams? We talked about on Formula One cars going at 200 miles an hour with a stable connection. Again, we talk about bicycling and BMX and all those kind of sports. You can now, does it open up those as well?
Absolutely. So the form factors have changed. So in actual fact, more and more of it is now cloud enabled. So we have everything from a mobile device that clearly you can use the 4K camera system in your smartphone, and if it's a modern enough smartphone, then you've got a number of eSIMs there. We can bond those together and receive them on the other side in broadcast quality. We have the backpack. We also have smaller units which you can strap on a bike. I strap this into my aerial Atom, which is my track day car, and I stream from that. So I don't know whether it's peak Formula One speeds, but certainly I can verify that at 150 miles an hour, it's quite a stable feed from most tracks in the UK. So it becomes really accessible, but I think it's the really exciting part is, as I say, the move beyond the hardware form factors and more into the software defined factors and pushing things straight into the cloud. So more and more our customers are thinking about, how do I go from ground to cloud? And then once they're in the cloud, they can do some clever things like add virtual sets, lower thirds, and graphics over the top to do that one thing, make the story more immersive and more engaging for the audience. I think that's really, really interesting.
And you mentioned earlier about 6G. I mean, we're moving rapidly into 5G standalone, which is someone said this is the true, real, full fat 5G. Sort of latency that is faster than the human brain, and is sort of mission critical applications now become possible. We're already talking about the standards for 6G. I mean, what does this mean for your industry? This kind of additional capabilities. What do you see coming down the line?
So I think it's ultimately it's a force for good. Connectivity, making connections that really matter and having them stable. You mentioned this word mission critical. Right? If you care about something, then you want to make sure that you can have good quality, make it massively reliable, but it's got to be usable and accessible for the people trying to do it. So the more connection options you have, whether that be LEO, lower satellite stuff, so if you want to do that, so things like Starlink, or whether it's good old-fashioned dark fiber connections or mobile connectivity, our task is to find the best cost option that's available for the customer to meet their requirements at that point in time. So adding in 6G, adding in 4G, adding in 5G. Now, at the moment, for instance, this unit can bond 4 and 5G together. Why would we do that? Well, because we're offsetting and offloading bandwidth or load against different parts of the spectrum. Right? So it just gives us more options for getting signals back to where we want them to do in a reliable manner. So as we see 5G, private 5G slicing, and what we call advanced connectivity becoming more augmented and manageable, and therefore more accessible, then what do we think that means? We think that means that more people will use this type of technology, IP video over bonded cellular, to tell more stories. If they're telling more stories, they're generating more value. They're informing, educating, and entertaining, and that's what it's all about.
Brilliant. And this is the Live Better Connected podcast, and the reason we've done this is to really sort of shed a light on how mobile technology is in enhancing and making our lives better. One of those areas is we've talked about some of these cutting edge technologies, but obviously it's actually how connected we each individually are. And one of those things we're trying to do is build people's understanding of how connected they are. So we've got a challenge at the moment called How Connected Are You? I'm hoping you've taken it. What was your results?
I took it. I've taken it twice to see whether I could get a different set of results, but there's no lying. Apparently, I am a heavy user. Who knew, right? In this room, I've got.
Well, if you're going on your aerial Atom, I can imagine you must be.
I've got 16 connected devices in this room, but the rest of the house, I think, is far more connected. So I thought people like my children would be heavy users because they're always looking at least one or two screens. It's crazy. But apparently, everything from the car to the air conditioning unit to the way that I work, is massively connected. And it was quite sobering to really kind of break down how reliant I am in communicating with my team wherever they are around the world, communicating with customers, talking to somebody like yourself. But I just take it all for granted, and I've sort of forgotten how many points of connection I have.
And this is, I think, it's generally something we are finding throughout this this challenge that we're doing. Is more and more people are realizing, like you say, how connected and almost how dependent they are on it. And we all know when the signal goes down, we feel lost. We don't know what we're doing. But it leads me on to sort of the next point. This is my final point today, which is again, we're shining a light on why mobile technology is essential. But people are still quite. There's a large proportion of people who are quite apathetic about it. They continue to sort of push against the installation of the mobile infrastructure that's out there, which, your company, everyone who uses a mobile, which as we're seeing is most everyone relies on. But again, it's getting that infrastructure built in those streets, in those towns, in those areas, and and in rural areas as well. My question to you is you're at the cutting edge, and how do we turn that dial to make people sort of realize that actually I do want this? This is an important part of my life.
I think it's about perceived value. So I've just got back from holiday, and we were staying on a mountainside in Sicily, and the place we were staying had no landline connectivity. And we got out of the car, and my son turned around, scanned the horizon, and went, "Brilliant! I can see a 4G mast." And he's only 13, because that meant that he could do what he wanted to do. He wasn't going to be cut off from the world. So he views connectivity as an essential. So it's the first thing he cares about when he goes to something, which is really interesting. But in our world, in my world, connectivity means the ability to share. And I work in an attention or content creation economy. And people generate value that I participate in by creating stories and sharing those stories with audiences who also see value. So anything that can make it easier for the sharing of information can help us generate more value. And it's not for nothing that we call it the digital economy. It drives real growth and real empowerment of different people. So we're talking about women's football, and that used to be something that kind of raised a smile in the pubs and clubs. But what's happened is that because there's an interest, because there's a platform for people to share their worldview and their experience in high quality, engaging ways, more people can resonate with that. And the more that happens, which is all enabled by us working to simplify connectivity, because that's all 5G is, right? It's just the next step in us sharing stories. And we humans, we're storytellers. We resonate with stories. That's how we educate, share ideas, we influence people. And so when people say, "Oh, do I want one of these relatively ugly things in my back garden?" It's like, well, actually what you're looking at is you're looking at a gateway to, crudely, the font of all human knowledge. Why would you not want that?
Well, Steve, I couldn't agree more. And I think you talk about storytelling. You certainly have been a great storyteller here today, and you told us some really amazing insights, some really exciting stuff. This happened with both mobile technology, but also LiveU, which really is pushing the boundaries, and we hope it continues that way. So, thank you for speaking to me today. And to those listening, if you do want to learn more about the wonders of mobile technology, please visit mobileuk.org and click on the Live Better Connected campaign. Please also don't forget to take the challenge, as Steve has done, and hopefully you will find yourself how connected you are. And also, if I could also remind people, our previous podcast with Ineka Botta, who it was a vanguard of the industry, who set up mobile networks in some fascinating places, including countries that are still behind the Iron Curtain within the USSR and areas ravaged by war and natural disasters. Again, a really interesting discussion there. And of course, please check out our social media channels and please subscribe. And with that, thank you all, and thank you, Steve. And I will look forward to our next in our series, which we will be showcasing soon. Thank you.
Thank you.